Michael Jones from Inspiring Philosophy, the Apostate Prophet, a third guy who I don't know anything about. I'm sorry. They take on the idea that Jesus was not a Jew from a Kim Iversen video. They're going to respond to it. I'm going to play a few of their clips. I'm going to introduce you to an article by David Miller talking about how the Bible uses the term Jew, Jewish, Judean. For anybody that's really interested in the cultural context of Jesus and understanding who Jesus was, this is actually a really important conversation. I think it could be very meaningfully done. I think there's a lot of nuance to uncover. So I'm glad you're with me. Let's get into it.
Now, I know you might not care about this, whether or not Jesus was a Jew. Now, I'm going to say Jesus was absolutely not a Jew, and I'm going to give you my reasoning for this. There's been a lot of debate around Christmas about Jesus being a Jew or Jesus being a Palestinian.
There has been no debate.
There has been no debate.
She's the only one who's trying to make this really dumb argument. She's pretending like she's part of like some big like minority. Yeah, we've all been debating this. No, it's just you, Kim. You're the only one who's this bad.
There has not been a debate. It's just you, Kim. You are making that stupid point. And despite everything, despite every source, scholarly source refuting you, you refuse to admit that you were just wrong. You apparently have such a big problem with this that you keep acting like this is a very, very big debate. The world is discussing this right now. No, it's just you.
So you can see right there, I won't play a ton of their remarks because I kind of find them annoying. No offense, guys. They're not really taking serious the discussion that Kim is trying to bring out. Now, I think that she could have done a better job in a number of ways, but one of the ways would have been to bring on a Bible scholar to have this discussion. They're making the point that like nobody is discussing this. Nobody thinks this. Like the idea that Jesus was not a Jew is ridiculous. And I think that it has become very conventional to just say that Jesus is a Jew, but never ask a follow-up question of what do you mean by that? Because the danger here is that we would read our modern context of what the word Jew means back into the historical context of Jesus's day. That's anachronistic. We really shouldn't do that. And the other reason is that it's just vague. There's religious and ethnic context that goes with the word Jew that can be unhelpful. It's vague to the point of being unhelpful. But the idea that there is no debate, that Kim is the only one making this argument, just misses the point because there is actually scholarly debate on this topic. It's very meaningful, as I said, and I will leave a link to this article by David Miller. He's looking at the Greek in particular, but you can do the same thing with the Hebrew. The article deals with how we translate the Greek term, and these guys throughout this video will look at some of the Greek, and so this will be helpful as we move forward and unpack this. Again, if you're sticking with me, grab a cup of coffee, hang in there. It is an important conversation. The conclusion sketches the decline of religious and the rise of ethnicity as interpretive categories in the scholarship. So that's one of the reasons why the term is a little bit vague. Are you talking about a religious Jew, an ethnic Jew, etc.? And through time, biblical authors in particular may have used it in a slightly different context and in a different way. So it's really important to pay attention to the religious implications, the ethnic context. Raises questions about the meaning of the term that requires further discussion. The second article in this series will analyze the use of religion and ethnicity in the scholarship on the meaning of Judaism and evaluate the debate over the term's English translation. In the latest section of Bauer's Greek-English Lexicon of the New Testament and Other Early Christian Literature, Danker recommends translating the Greek word Judeos as Judean instead of the more common English word Jew. So yes, it has become very common to translate the Greek word Judeos as Jew. This is a very conventional translation, but a conventional translation doesn't necessarily mean the best translation. You can think of the story of Jesus's parents not finding any room in the inn. Well, there wasn't really an inn, was there? But a lot of conventional translations still preserve that word inn when better words would apply. So according to Dacre, more is at stake than just the outcome of a philosophical debate. Yeah, and in my world, what is at stake is how I understand the person of Jesus and his context. So he's quoting Dacre here. Incalculable harm has been caused by simply glossing over this term for many readers or auditors of the Bible translation. They do not practice the historical judgment necessary to distinguish between circumstances and events of an ancient time and a contemporary ethnic, religious, social realities, with the result that an anti-Judaism, that anti-Judaism in the modern sense of the term, is needlessly fostered through the Bible text. I think that's a really good quote. A lot of Bible translators are not going to want to appear to be anti-Jewish in their translation, but you also want to be faithful to the historical context, and our modern world will view these words very different. Eisler is also concerned about anachronisms. Okay, so anachronism, again, I think I've said this already, but that's if I take my modern context, the word Jew in my modern context, and I read it back into an ancient world, and I say, well, Jesus was a Jew. What do you mean by that? You certainly don't mean he was a modern rabbinic Jew the way like we would think of a modern Jew today. And if you don't explain that, then people who aren't thinking critically about this will assume that you mean Jesus is a Jew in that sense, when he couldn't be, because that context around the word Jew didn't exist 2,000 years ago. Now, was Jesus religiously a Jew in the first century? That's even up for debate. Was he part of a Jewish religious structure or Judaism of the first century? Now you can look at the Gospels, and based off of those examples, ask yourself the question: would a first century Jewish religious leader have agreed with you that Jesus was a Jew? I think you're going to get a similar answer than maybe Kim or other people might say, well, no, he's not really one of us. And we see that in the way the first century Jewish religious leaders interacted with Jesus. Now, some of them did come and follow Jesus. So again, there's a lot of conversation to be had about this. You could think of Joseph of Arimathea. You could think of Nicodemus. There were Jewish religious leaders that looked at Jesus and went, this guy's onto something here. But of course, there were other Jewish religious leaders who were like, he's not one of us. And they would call him a Nazarene, and they would make a point of isolating him from the Jewish religious structure. The word Jews, Jewish, and even Judaism now carry meanings indelibly fashioned by events after the first century. Indeed, it's arguable that translating Judeos as Jew is not only intellectually indefensible, but also morally questionable. To honor the memory of these first century people, it is necessary to call them by a name that accords with their own sense of identity. I think that's huge, because a part of this conversation is to just simply dismiss the first century context that Jesus was living in. Jews does not suit this purpose. Judean is the only apt reading in English of Judeos. Now, that's Eisler. Again, I will leave a link to this article, but to the first point of the AP, to their first point, this idea that it's just Kim bringing this up, just completely, you just dismissing this whole conversation that's going on that really does exist. That's not what I want. I want this. Let me get through a little bit more of this article, because I do think it will help us further the conversation that they will then bring up later on in this episode. Let me know if you're hanging in there. If you have any thoughts or questions, please put those in the comments. I do try to respond to comments as best as I can. Keep them, if you come to this conversation already ideologically committed to something, then, you don't feel the need to interact, because that's not going to be helpful. I am committed to understanding the person of Jesus and his religious and historical context. I am committed to understanding what the Bible is saying about Jesus and about the people of Israel. So that's what's important for me, and I'm on a quest for that truth. And I realize I might be pushing against some of the conventional ideas of Jesus being a Jew. He certainly was a Judean. He certainly is of the tribe of Judah. He's certainly of the line of David. So if that's what we're talking about, cool, thumbs up. Yep, totally agree with you. Jesus is that. So back to the article by David Miller. The Jew is replaced with Judean, and thus we have a Judean, a Jew-free text, a text purified of Jews, which I think would be a tragedy. Complementing this erasure, that's a fun word. Complementing this erasing, scholars then proclaim that Jesus is neither Jew nor Judean, but a Galilean. And once Jesus is not a Jew or a Judean, but a Galilean, it's also an easy step to make him an Aryan. So much for the elimination of anti-Semitism by means of changing the vocabulary. So you can see there's two sides of this argument. You don't want to just say, oh, Jew doesn't appear in the Bible, and it's only Judean. It's only ever used to refer to the Judean people. Well, is that fair as well? Or is there a way in which the Bible is referring to the Judean people and their region and their cultural context, and Jewish people in another way, maybe a religious context? Schwartz assumes that Judean is exclusively a geographical term, whereas being a Jew may have to do with one's descent or with one's religion or both. Of course, you can convert to Judaism and be a Jew, and that way, even if ethnically you weren't, you're not, or you were not born in that region. So again, great article. I think that's pretty much it. Again, I will leave a link, but back to this episode. Again, I think that Kim could have done a better job, because essentially what you're doing is, I think you're provoking a good conversation. But just like I think you can't really say Jesus was a Jew without providing extra context by what you mean by that, you can't really say Jesus isn't a Jew without doing the same thing. What do you mean by Jesus isn't a Jew? And I think the intent here is to strip away some of the modern context of how we use that word and get back to a more historically accurate understanding of, at least again for me, particularly how the Bible uses this term. Now, the unfortunate thing is you have, these three men essentially bullying Kim Iversen. They even address that. This is like 3.5 hours long. It's almost 4 hours long. I will confess I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I did listen to maybe 2 hours of it. And they even say, they're essentially bullying her, but she sort of deserves it because the claims that she's making are so ridiculous. And you can hear that in their tone. And I feel like what I hear is someone with an ideological position who cannot even entertain the idea that that position needs to be adjusted. If you want to have a serious conversation about this topic, you have to be willing to entertain opposing viewpoints, even if maybe they come at you from sort of an uneducated standpoint. Now, the unfortunate thing is now, IP and these guys, they've bullied and made Kim look ridiculous, so that anyone who might share her views will now be afraid to speak up, because they think, oh, if I say something similar, I will be put into this category of a ridiculous human being who is worthy of ridicule and being bullied. So it's a really unfortunate way of trying to carry on a discussion, which I think needs to happen. I do think that this is an important discussion. So gentlemen, if any of you happen to come across this video, just dial back the ridicule so that an honest conversation can be had. Even if you think Kim is ridiculous, that's fine. Listen to what's being said, and then maybe think that there are other, and I don't know her motivation, you know, I'm not defending her motivation for posting this video, but maybe there is more going on. And if you're not willing to see that, then you're going to miss something. You're going to miss what could be an otherwise very meaningful conversation. And again, for me, particularly about the person of Jesus and his identity. So and I'm not actually going to go through this the way they did it. I'm gonna jump around to some of the Bible passages that they point out, and then we're gonna look at those Bible passages together.
This is standard. I've never seen anyone who believes the thing she's saying, and she's saying this is just standard belief, and she's fortunately she's here to rescue us from things that we don't believe at all.
I just find it so funny. It's like repeatedly she tells us that this is something that we have been taught after the Holocaust, and it has not been corrected. Here is the Greek text, man. Here's the Greek text. Okay, we talked about it earlier. John 4:9. Here's the Greek text. You see this word here, Kim, and everyone else, gropers. You see this word? You see where it says Jew? Jew is just the English word, the English version, the English way of using a term that went from Yehudi or Yehaya or Judaios or Juden and so on into English as Jew. And it just comes from this here. This is the original Greek, Judaios. She refers to Jesus as a Judaios. He does not object to it. In fact, just a few verses later, right here at around 22, you will have Jesus himself saying to her that we worship. So you worship what you know not. We worship what we know, for salvation is of the Jews. So he's referring to himself and his community as Jews.
But AP, I mean.
Okay. So great passage, John chapter 4. We will go there. We will look at that. And again, we have the backdrop already of some of the scholarly conversation that's going on here. Now, for those who know this Bible passage, you will know it is a conversation about location. We Samaritans worship over here. You Jews, you worship in Jerusalem. Where do I find God? That's the question of the Samaritan woman. So it is a question of location. It's a geographical question. Hopefully you can see that well enough. I'm not in the way. We can look at this term as well just by clicking on it. That's really, really small, but you can see it is the term Judeos. It's right here. How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink of water? Samaritans don't deal with the Jews. And this opens up a whole nother conversation about the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Israel. That's part of the context of this conversation. The northern kingdom had been assimilated earlier on. Some of them left. Assyria came in, and the northern kingdom was essentially lost or intermixed, and then the southern kingdom became the kingdom of Judah. That's where Jerusalem is, and that's where the temple was. And so the cultural life of Judah became distinct from the northern kingdom. The religious life of Judah became distinct from the northern kingdom. And so here we have Jesus having a conversation with a Samaritan woman, a woman who would have been a part of that northern kind of mixing with foreigners, whereas, you know, the Jews would have sort of kept more of their tradition. And I do think that that's something about this conversation that I appreciate. There is something being preserved here in Judah that is important. But again, how is it that you, being a Judean, ask me for a drink since I am a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. It's a conversation about geography. Now, there is the point where he says, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we know because salvation is from the Jews. Jesus said, woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Again, it's the same word, Judeos, in Greek. Salvation is from the Judeans. Now, does that sound wrong to translate it that way? Salvation is from the Judeans. Well, what's the next part of an hour is coming, and now is when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him will worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare all things to us. Jesus said to her, I'm the one who speak to you, am he. I who speak to you am he. So salvation is from the Jews. If you translate that salvation is from the Judeans, is that out of context with their conversation? They're talking about the Messiah, prophesied to come from Judah. The scepter will not depart from his hand. The king will come, right? So now I think I am pushing a little bit. In some ways, it seems like Jews is a better translation, but it doesn't seem like Judeans misses any of the context. In fact, it might lend to the context because they're talking about geography earlier on, and then they're talking about the Messiah later. Where does the Messiah come from? He comes from Judah. He comes from the tribe of Judah. And so Jesus says, I who speak to you am he. So again, back to this, the point that he's making is not a very strong one, because although we've translated the term into the English word Jew, the Greek word is actually used for Judean more often. And that is part of the conversation that I think needs to be had. How is the Bible using these terms in reference to what? It seems like contextually, more often than not, if God is going to talk about his people, he talks about Israel. When he needs to talk about something specific to Judah or Judea, we're going to use this word. So that was John 4. I do want to look at this passage in Esther chapter 2, and they do talk about it here. One thing to notice is they're responding to Kim's X post there, and she writes this. If you can't see it, I apologize. This is a modern translation, so she's debating with somebody on X about Jesus being a Jew or not, or whatever. And her point is this is a modern translation. The original text doesn't use the word Jew. The word doesn't exist at the time of writing. That's Kim saying that, and here's their response.
Jesus. So Jesus didn't exist because it would have been Jesus. Oh boy.
Yeah, why are we talking about Jesus then? The word Jesus also didn't exist. Fantastic. Good point. Great point, Kim Iversen. Fantastic point. So,
by the way, AP, that point about Jesus being from the tribe of Judah, that's also important because one of the things they'll argue is that this ultimately comes from the tribe of Judah after the northern kingdoms were exiled and so on, and Judea became what was left. And therefore, the word Jew came ultimately from the word, basically Judeans. Yeah. But the word Judean eventually came to mean all the tribe, everyone that was left over, even if they're from other tribes. And eventually we get the word Jew from that. Anyway, the point is, even if you wanted to narrow it down and say, okay, it ultimately means someone from the tribe of Judah before the meaning was broadened. Okay, well, Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. If you wanted to say from the land of Judea, and that's what it meant. Okay, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in the land of Judea. And so it's like any criteria, any meaning of the word you want to come up with, Jesus fits, unless you're specifically saying a modern rabbinic version of Judaism that rejects Jesus. Jesus wouldn't fit into that. Right. But now you're being extremely specific, and that's not.
Yeah. And it's, I mean, unless I misunderstood Kim, that is her point. She's saying the term will carry with it a modern idea of what a Jew is or what Judaism is, and Jesus is not that. So in that section, and again, I'm sorry, I don't know this guy's name, he agrees with Kim Iversen, as if I understand Kim Iversen correctly.
That's usually not what we mean by Jew.
We also have a problem here, which is that there is a famous example in Esther 2:5, which is I think one of the first instances where the word Jew shifts meaning, or is used as a general term to refer to all of Jews or Israelites. And so it appears here, and from here on it appears more frequently. And by the time of Jesus, the word has become a name for all of those who share the traditional Jewish beliefs and come from those tribes, or who convert even to them. So here is Esther 2:5. It says, "Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew a Yehudi of the tribe of Benjamin.
So this is after it had started broadening to include anyone who's left over. Any Israelites who are left over at that point are just being called Jews.
Yes, of the tribe of Benjamin, named Mordecai, son of Jair. So this is referring to Mordecai here of the tribe of Benjamin as a Jew, as a Yehudi, which is the very same word that we are talking about.
And we're shifting into Hebrew, but the same thing happens. There was a Jew whose name is Mordecai. Okay, so he's from the tribe of Benjamin, and again, the southern kingdom is just referred to as Judea. The tribe of Benjamin is in that southern kingdom, and so Mordecai, as a Benjaminite, is referred to as a Judean. Now remember the inward reference and the outward reference. This is a very Babylonian book, or in a sense, like you're writing to people that were in exile, unless I have my facts straight. So maybe do some research on that as well, because I'm not as confident on that. But as far as the context of Esther, they are in exile. He's being referred to as a Jew, and his name is Mordecai, which is really interesting. This is actually a reference to the god Marduk, the pagan god. The name reflects the pagan god of this Babylonian deity Marduk. And Esther, being a very sort of secular book, it famously sort of doesn't mention God, and you get the term Jew there. And it still, again, contextually seems to be referring to someone from Judah who is from the tribe of Benjamin. And so this term, now to compare this, Esther 2:5 he said it's one of the places where the term starts to shift meaning. I think he's probably right there, but it's not one of the first times the term is mentioned, and we want to contrast this with 2 Kings, actually. So in 2 Kings, we have the same word being used. At that time, rising king of Aram recovered Elath from Aram and cleared the Judeans out of Elath entirely. Now, this is earlier on. This is in 2 Kings. But here you have Yehudi, the same word from Esther 2:5, being translated Judean. So again, just to say, well, there's the word, it's the word Jew, and therefore it's like there is more to the conversation. I think part of the conversation is how the Bible uses the word over time, how it develops. How does it develop from 2 Kings to Esther 2:5? The contexts are completely different. Here, the term is being used to refer to specifically to Judeans. In Esther, it seems like the meaning has maybe broadened a little bit. But again, I think it's kind of funny that they go to Esther as like a talking point, because for one, there is debate about Esther being in the canon because it doesn't refer to Yahweh, doesn't refer to God. It is sort of quote unquote secular in that sense. Now, I think it's supposed to be in the canon. I don't have a problem with it being in the canon. I think it's there for a reason. And I think it does help us understand how the Bible uses this term in particular. So I think it's great. So here, again, the guy whose name I don't know brings up Acts chapter 2:5. I think this is a great verse to look at. So let's check it out.
Really dumb.
In
Hey,
the Bible,
let me just read this little passage right here. So this is from Acts chapter 2. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews. But where were they from there? There were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. Because they were dwelling there, not permanently. They were dwelling there because it was feast time. It was feast time. They would travel to come to Jerusalem. Now there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And at this sound, the multitude came together, and they were bewildered because each one was hearing them speak in his own language. And they were amazed. Anyway, it gets down to, how is it that we each hear, each of us in his own native language, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya belonging to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome? What's this mean? It means that according to the Bible, it no longer meant simply someone from the land of Judea. It's saying they came from all kinds of lands. They came from all kinds of lands. So what are you talking about? There, you're talking about ethnicity, or you're talking about even people who've converted. The Bible itself uses the word Jew in multiple ways, applying to multiple groups.
So, and I think that's I do think that's a good point. Now, one of the interesting things is, they're sort of making Kim's point. I think they don't realize it because when I'm listening to Kim, of course, they're talking over her. So maybe I'll find her video on Rumble and link that as well if you want the whole context. And the point is that there are multiple uses for the word. The point is that there are multiple ways to define the word. And if you just say Jesus is a Jew without qualifying what you mean, it's too vague to be helpful, and you risk becoming anachronistic, taking a modern context, and then saying Jesus would have supported what's going on geopolitically right now. Why? Because he's a Jew. That's the danger there of being anachronistic. So what's funny is they're sort of making Kim's point there, like, hey, there's multiple ways of understanding this term. And I think at one point they say, and Jesus fits all of them, but I would disagree with that point. Like, Jesus doesn't fit all of them. He fits some of them. Some is not all. Interestingly as well, and I might play this clip near the end here, but, part of this conversation is that the term Jew or Jewish or Judean doesn't refer to Israel. Israel is a broader context. You could be a Judean and be part of Israel, but not all Israel is Judean. Paul even later will say not all Israel is Israel. So again, this conversation will really help you if you are a Christian understand your Bible and understand the context, particularly of the New Testament, because one of the biggest questions was, do Christians need to become Jews first before they become Christian? So Acts, now there were Jews living in Jerusalem, of course, because that's where you go. Now this is once again the term Judeos. So in its context, and one of the things that they don't really point out is that the IOS at the end here would indicate a geographical location. As far as I'm not really a Greek scholar or anything like that. I mean, I am a Bible teacher, so I go into the Greek a lot. And this IOS, this distinction here at the end, the etymology of the word, the way the word is actually being constructed, seems to imply a geographical location. We did cover this a little bit in the live stream, which I will leave a link to as well. But there you go. So even in Acts, we're still carrying that context of there were Jews living in Jerusalem. Yes, they were Judeans living in Jerusalem. So Judea is the kingdom, Jerusalem's the city. That makes sense. Now, I wonder about this, and anybody that wants to take a crack at this, let me know. In the Greek, there would be no punctuation here. We would have to look at this and look at how the words are pointing to each other. Now, there were Jews living in Jerusalem, so that's one group. Devout men from every nation under heaven. Is that the same group or a different group? There's a comma here in the English, but of course that wouldn't exist in the Greek. Is this a list? Jews living in Jerusalem, devout men from every nation under heaven, which would make sense later on when you see, there's all these people represented. So again, the conversation is about geography. Now, this is one passage that I would say it seems like the meaning of the term Jew or Judean, has been expanded to have a more full-orbed view of the cultural and religious context of the first century temple worship that was going on. It really does seem to indicate that. And so maybe, again, we here have a sense of how the Bible develops its usage of this term. But again, I do think there is more more to be said here. And yeah, so if you have any questions at this point, let me know. I do, and let me know, like, you know, I don't know, I'm probably 40 minutes into this conversation right now. If you're still here, you're clearly interested in this conversation. Help me understand why. What is it about this that you find important? Why? And again, these guys really do kind of ridicule Kim, and yet they spend an hour and 46 minutes talking about Kim. So, so what does that tell you? You know, again, are they just sort of ideologically captured and they can't stand the idea that someone would push on their ideology? Or is it deep down inside they know that this is a very meaningful conversation, or it should be? Again, I give them kind of a D minus on their approach here, even if I would give them probably like a B for their like engaging in the conversation, because I think it's an important conversation to be engaged with. I just think they needed to do it in a way that facilitates more meaningful conversation. So you'll hear some of that here. I just thought, you know, again, I'm gonna do a little bit of analysis here on just kind of their approach, and hope that in the future we could do a better job.
Merriam-Webster.
There it is. Yeah, look, 4 definitions there. Well, 5 if you include 3A and 3B, because you could be a member of the tribe of Judah or an Israelite. Okay, Jesus meets 3.
A person belonging to a
Obviously.
continuation through descent or conversion of the ancient Jewish people, one whose religion is Judaism, one a member of the tribe of Judah, Israelite, a member of a nation existing in Palestine from the 6th century to the first century AD. That's what they do.
So where would Jesus fit in those definitions? Let me know.
Middle English from Anglo-French Ju, from Latin Judeus, from Greek Judaios, from Hebrew Yehudi, from Yehuda, Judah, Jewish kingdom.
But you see, they're all spelled differently,
So you'll notice that in that etymology that he gives, the term Jew does not appear. Now, maybe in other languages you could make that jump, the French and what have you. But when it starts talking about the Greek and the Hebrew, the etymology includes Judah, Jewish kingdom. And he sort of glosses over this point without realizing, again, that there is something here.
Well, the primary reason why I'm responding to Kim Iversen is that it's very low-hanging fruit. And I thought, I'm kind of like, okay, do I really want to sit here and actually spend time studying and researching and responding to more knowledgeable and serious
Or do you just want to
individuals?
point at someone and laugh and say, ha ha ha, you don't?
Yeah. Do I want to go?
Or do you just want to point at someone and laugh and say, ha ha ha, you're dumb? That's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. So that gives you a clue as to I don't know that these are the right people to carry on the conversation. I appreciate that they're trying to engage in it. I appreciate that Kim is trying to engage with it. But if that's your approach, you're not the right person to carry on the conversation. You can disinvite yourself from the conversation unless you want to have a meaningful, engaging look at the history. Hopefully we've done that a little bit for you. Again, I approach this as a Christian person who really thinks it's important for me to understand who Jesus is, how the Bible uses these terms that we're talking about, how I understand Judea, the kingdom of Judah, the northern tribe. It's all very important to the ministry and life of Jesus. And so I hope that that's helpful. There's a Bible passage that I'm thinking of right now that could be interesting. Yeah, let's go to this. And just to illustrate why I think some of this is important for how we understand the Bible and the ministry of Jesus, look at Ezekiel 37:14 again. How we understand Judah helps us understand the northern kingdom. Why was Jesus' ministry in Galilee? Why is he talking to this Samaritan woman? There's all kinds of things that fall into place if we can have this conversation in a meaningful way. The word of the Lord came again to me, saying, "And you, son of man, take for yourself one stick and write on it for Judah and for the sons of Israel, his companions. Then take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim." That's in reference to the northern kingdom. The house of Israel, his companions. Both are referred to as the house of Israel, interestingly. Then join them for yourself, one to another, into one stick, that they may become one in your hand. When the sons of your people speak to you, saying, will you not declare to us what you mean by this? Say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribe of Israel, his companions, and I will put them with it, with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they will be one in my hand. The stick on which you write will be in your hand before your eyes. Say to them, thus says the Lord God, behold, I will take the sons of Israel from among the nations where they have gone, and I will gather them from every side and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land on the mountains of Israel, and one king will be their king for all of them. And they will no longer be two nations and no longer be divided into two kingdoms. So, who can do this? Now, I think that prophecy is this weird thing where there's like fulfillment at this point, but who's really going to fulfill this? Who's really going to bring the people of God back together from among the nations? I think that's reflected in the ministry of Jesus. You can let me know what you think. He is from the tribe of Judah. He is a Judean. He is descended of David. And yet he is Joseph-like, is he not? He is that one who is rejected by his brothers and suffers, and yet saves his brothers and forgives them. So there is a lot to this conversation. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully there's a lot of value that you got out of this. And my one thing that I would suggest is share it with a friend and continue the discussion elsewhere, wherever you live, work, and play. I look forward to reading your comments, and I hope to see you in the next one.